Hi there! Thanks for joining me again. In this lesson, we will be learning about the fundamental movement skills, fundamental sports skills, and the teaching cues that go along with them. Teaching physical literacy can be understood better by likening it to teaching regular literacy. When we teach children how to read and write, we first teach them the alphabet, then sounds, then short words. Eventually, the child can read and write longer words, and then they're on to paragraphs, essays, theses, and potentially books. In physical education, we practice the equivalent of sitting a 5-year-old child down in front of a piece of paper and saying, "Here, write an essay." Then on top of that, we get his whole class to watch while he struggles to figure it out. This situation has the potential to stress out a child so much that they quit trying. This system of instructing is setting the kids up for failure because they are no longer confident in their abilities. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define fundamental movement skills in comparison to fundamental sport skills and list the most common fundamental movement skills. You should also be able to describe and demonstrate the teaching cues. To become physically literate, children need to master fundamental movement skills. But this mastery does not come all at once, and we need to remember that children are not just adults in miniature. For almost every skill, the developing child needs to go through a series of developmental stages. The goal should be to help every child move to the next most mature version of the skill they are learning, rather than pushing them to perform the skill the way an adult would. One question we as physical literacy teachers need to address is the myth that children just learn how to throw or just learn how to catch. While many children do develop good physical skills on their own by trial and error, there are more children who do not. And for this group, the consequences of not having proper education can be severe. Like we discussed in the first lesson, studies show children are more likely to drop out of sports and activities because of a lack of confidence. Missing out on fundamental movement skills also means that the child is unlikely to choose to take part in a formal sport that requires proficiency in that skill, and this restricts their lifelong choice of health-promoting activities. It also restricts their opportunities for sporting excellence. Being unable to perform even a single fundamental movement skill can seriously restrict later opportunities for recreational or competitive activity, as can be seen from the few examples shown on screen. If a child can't run or run quickly, they won't take part in soccer, basketball, volleyball, track and field, squash, badminton, rugby, or tennis. And if they can't swim, they won't take part in swimming, diving, water polo, scuba diving, kayaking, sailing, or surfing. And these are only a few examples. For children to have success in sport, either as a health-related recreational activity or in competition, it is important that they master fundamental movement skills before learning fundamental sport skills, and important that they learn fundamental sport skills before being introduced to specific techniques. Learning fundamental sport skills before mastering related fundamental movement skills reduces performance ability later on. So what exactly are fundamental movement skills? They're sometimes called fundamental motor skills, and they're a set of basic skills that make up the skills for sports, games, and lifetime activities. They constitute the ABCs of movement, and they're equivalent to the letters or words in regular literacy. Thinking back to the story earlier about asking a child who can't read to write an essay, we are teaching physical education the same way in Canada. We start with the sport, the essay, and expect children to just be competent. To change this system, we need to start with the basics. There are many different opinions of what exactly the main fundamental movements are, but the Physical and Health Education Canada organization states that there are 12 fundamental movements to master before a child is physically literate. These are dodge, hop, skip, log roll, stork stand, jump, kick, dribble, overarm throw, catch, run, and sidearm strike. However, according to Active for Life, there are more than 20. These skills can be broken down into 3 categories: locomotion, manipulation, and stabilization. Locomotion or traveling movement skills are things like running, hopping, leaping, galloping, skipping, sliding, basically any movement that you use to go from point A to point B. Manipulation or object control movement skills are things like catching, pulling, dribbling, throwing, kicking, and striking. Any movement that includes the manipulation of equipment, whether it's a ball, a bat, or a rope. Stabilization movement skills are things like stork stand, dodging, stretching, turning, landing, pivoting, hanging, any movement that includes balance. To be physically literate, a child needs to develop equally in each category. Thinking back to the Jenga set with the ABCs as a base, agility, balance, coordination, and speed. If only locomotion games are taught, a child might have a lot of speed, but no coordination for a sport because they never developed stabilization movements. When teaching children the fundamental movement skills, it's important as a leader to encourage and teach the children these skills by using what we call kid-friendly language. These are cues that are short, to the point, and understandable to a child. Here are some examples that may assist in your teaching. Okay, kids, when we're running, you want to bend your arms and move your elbows straight back like you're trying to elbow a bad guy behind you. I want you guys to pretend you're holding a potato chip in your hand because you're really hungry. And then your hands move from your hip to your lip, and you eat that chip, and it goes back and forth. All right, we're going to point to your target first, then bring your throwing shoulder back like Robin Hood drawing an arrow. Bring hand back behind your head like you're going to give somebody a high five. And then when you throw, follow through by letting your arm come all the way across your body. There are 3 developmental stages of any fundamental movement: early stage, intermediate stage, and mature stage. Canadian Sport for Life has created assessment rubrics for parents, teachers, and coaches that are easy to use. If we take throwing as an example, the first stage, or initial on the play basic evaluation, shows little or no use of legs or trunk and no twisting for momentum. The next stage, the child will step forward with the same foot he uses to throw the ball. There will be some twisting of the trunk, but not much. In the mature stage, the thrower steps forward with the opposite foot as they used to throw the ball. There's more twisting of the trunk, and the arm starts the throw from behind the head. On the play basic form, the last stage is proficiency, which is the mature stage, but the thrower is mostly accurate with their aim. There is also a section for whether the child shows confidence in their abilities, no matter the stage. If you had to coax them to participate and demonstrate, then they are likely not confident in their abilities. Now that we know what fundamental movement skills are, what's the difference between those and fundamental sport skills? Throwing is a fundamental movement skill, and a child learning this skill will learn to throw lots of different sized balls with one hand, or with both hands, and will learn to throw the ball at different speeds, sometimes for accuracy, using a lot of different targets, and sometimes for distance. When the child learns to throw a softball, using a softball pitching motion and trying to get the ball to pass over home plate, they have moved from learning a fundamental movement skill to learning a fundamental sport skill. We will learn how to break down sports into fundamental sport skills later in this course. For children to have success in sport, either as a health-related recreational activity or in competition, it is important that they master fundamental movement skills before learning fundamental sport skills, and important they learn fundamental sport skills before being introduced to specific techniques. In physical education, the building blocks need to be taught before the child can play sports. By putting a child into a specific sport at a young age, they will not grow up to be physically literate. A child needs to learn to walk before they can run. Congratulations on completing Lesson 2. In our next lesson, we will learn about breaking down sports into fundamental sport skills and how to keep children interested in physical literacy by creating a positive learning environment. Now that you've finished Lesson 2, review and complete the post-content tasks, and we'll meet again in Lesson 3.